Good morning. My name is Kimberly Cook, and among other things, I am Travis Cook's wife. So it is a thrill to be here with you this morning, and both he and I are very excited to be presenting up here together. And we will be doing things a little bit differently today. Not a surprise because there's two people presenting instead of just one. But we are going to be presenting in the first person the testimonies of the characters of the story of Hannah. So you may be familiar with them from the book of 1 Samuel, but today we're going to have them on stage here in person. It's a story about family, it's a story about faith, and most importantly, at least for our purposes this morning, it's a story about disappointment. So disappointment isn't necessarily something that we often couple with discipleship, right? We like to talk about blessing and victory and breakthrough, but the reality is that a lot of what it means to follow God is walking alongside him through seasons when we don't really like what's happening. Hannah had to learn that lesson. Elkanah had to carry that with her. And Eli, despite his flaws, was also a part of how God met them in their pain. So I would like to encourage you, I know it's different today, but I would like to encourage you to try to enter into the story. So this isn't just history, these are testimonies. So just like we have videos sometimes with people talking about how God has worked in their lives, this is a witness of how God is faithful and can be faithful even when life seems really empty and when it seems really, really, really hard. So first, we're going to hear from Elkanah.
I can't think of a worse time to be alive. These days were nothing like what my father and my grandfather would tell me about days gone by. With Moses and with Joshua, the heroes of the faith, the people that we could look up to. There's nobody to look up to these days. There was old Eli at Shiloh where the tabernacle was. And I think he genuinely tried. I think he cared about the people. But I think there were flaws in his leadership. He had these two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and they were vile men. And the older Eli got, the more and more responsibility, the more control these two men had. And every time we went up to worship at Shiloh, there were these two men there, and they would take from our sacrifices at times when they weren't supposed to take from it. They would take from our sacrifices parts of it that they weren't supposed to take. And we were powerless to stop them. We all talked and gossiped and spread rumors, or heard rumors rather, about what they were doing with the women that would come to worship and come to serve at the tabernacle. We hoped that it wasn't true, but many of us believed it. And we wouldn't let our wives or daughters go to the tabernacle alone. These were such disappointing times. We had no leadership to look up to. And we kept going up. And you might say, well, Elkanah, why did you keep going to the tabernacle? Why did you keep supporting such a corrupt system? I went because I wanted my family to know that there was a leader that they could look to. There was someone that they could count on. And it wasn't Eli, and it wasn't Hophni and Phinehas, and it wasn't even a prophet or a king if God should will that we have one day. And it wasn't even me. It was Yahweh. I wanted them to know that they could depend on God's leadership in their life. They could trust him. And no matter what was going on, no matter how disappointing the circumstances were, they could follow Yahweh and they could depend on him. And so we kept going. Year after year, we would go and worship, go and sacrifice, and we would go and pray. And probably like many of you, we prayed for all kinds of things. One of the things I prayed for a lot was better days for my kids. That's probably how many of you pray. What parent doesn't want their children to live in an environment that's better than their own? I would pray for peace. We needed peace in those days. There were these neighbors that we had, the Philistines. Maybe you've heard of them. They were big, armored all in bronze, terrifying men. And as I worked in my fields, as I did the labor that I was supposed to do, I kept one eye over my shoulder, knowing that one day there would be a cloud of dust, a raiding party, or even the entire army coming, and I would just have moments to grab up everyone in my family and run for safety. I wish that peace with our neighbors was the only thing we needed, but I needed peace in my own home too. You see, our home was a place of conflict. When I met Hannah, it was an arranged marriage, and we got married. And I got to marry the love of my life. As I said, arranged marriage was how we did it then, but I loved her, and she loved me, and we would stay up late at night dreaming about the future that we would have together. We talked about how many kids we were going to have, 2, 4, 5. I about fell out of bed one night when she said she wanted to have 10 kids. I thought, oh man. But it was pretty clear after a little while that something was wrong. And that my sweet Hannah, who had such big dreams for the future, well, she wasn't going to get to enjoy those dreams because she couldn't get pregnant. And we tried and tried, and we prayed, and it seemed that God had closed the womb of my wife. That's how we referred to it then. We had some less faithful neighbors who we knew worshiped other gods as well as Yahweh, and they came to us and said, look, we had the same problem, Elkanah and Hannah. You guys should go to Asherah or Baal, these fertility gods and goddesses, and they'll help you. They gave us like a poultice, and they gave us a drink, and we were fine. We were pregnant the next month. And we said, no, we're not worshiping anyone but Yahweh. We are going to depend on him. And if he has chosen to do this, we will still trust in him. We will be faithful. I think one of the saddest days of my life was a day when my father came to visit. And I didn't know it at the time, but Hannah overheard the entire conversation. He stopped by and he said, I'm worried about you guys. And, you try to tell your parents, well, we're okay. He said, no, I'm worried about your future because you don't have any children. You see, in our people, among our people, the way that we planned for the future was by having children. They helped you work the land. And more than that, they took care of you when you were old. If we didn't have kids, there was a good possibility that we would starve when we were no longer able to work. And so my dad, being a good father himself, said, son, I'm worried about you guys. I'm worried about who's going to take care of you. He said, look at your faithful neighbors. Look at the people who worship Yahweh only. And when they've struggled with fertility. And when you look at your ancestors, Abraham and Jacob, they took other wives too. You need to do this. If you love Hannah, this is what you will do for her. Hannah heard the whole conversation, and when I went back into the house, she agreed with my father, but it broke her heart. So I married another woman. I married her name was Peninnah. And almost immediately she got pregnant. And it was a bittersweet day when my first child was born. I was so happy to have a child and so heartbroken for my wife. And this went on and on. Peninnah got pregnant again and again and again, and the more children she had, the worse the conflict got in our home because Hannah became more and more brokenhearted. And I tried to give her more and more attention and affection, and the more I did that, the more Peninnah became jealous of her and would just inflict retribution and pain and taunt her and provoke her over and over and over again. Every single circumstance in my life was broken. It was disappointing to see that this is how my life was going. And people ask me, they say, Elkanah, what did you learn from all this? I'll tell you what I learned. I learned that I couldn't fix any of it. As much as I wanted to, and I wanted to go up to Shiloh and throw Hophni and Phinehas out of the tabernacle and say, will somebody else do this job? But I couldn't. I wanted so much to be the leader that our people needed. I wanted to be a warrior and make peace with the Philistines on our terms. But I'm not that either. I couldn't even fix the conflicts in my own home. I couldn't even give my wife children. It's almost as if God had placed me in a situation to watch what he would do, to be a spectator in my own life. And I thought to myself, if I could just have lived in another time. Have you ever wanted to live in a different time? Have you ever thought that maybe if you'd been born in a different time, things would be better? I thought if I went and lived in the time of Moses, I would have never worshiped the golden calf, and I would have marched off right with Moses. I would have taken Jericho with Joshua. If I had lived in any other time, I could have been a person of action. But I live in this time. And what I've learned is following God is depending on God, even when you want to be doing anything else. Depending on God and continuing to depend on God, especially when you're powerless, especially when you can't fix it. But I should have been depending on God even before I got to the point where I realized I couldn't fix any of it. You see, genuinely following after God is depending on him. And the more and more and more I grew in my faith, the more I realized I needed to depend on him. And so we kept going up to Shiloh every single year, year after year after year. And one year, we were eating a meal together after the celebration. And it was normal, kind of tense family dinner. And I looked at Hannah, and she was downcast, she was sad, but she got this look on her face. And she looked me in the eyes, and she stood up, and she started walking right towards the tabernacle. And I'll let her tell you what happened next.
Amazing. I love you, Elkanah. At the point in my life that we're talking about, I couldn't think of a worse path to have been given. Whereas Elkanah was disappointed by his circumstances, I was disappointed by my whole life. And that seems so unfair because I married such a wonderful man. He loves me deeply, and he loves the Lord. And he would remind me of the mothers of our faith, of Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel, and how they had faced barrenness before too, and God used it, and we hoped that God would do that with our stories too. But year after year, nothing changed. And it started to feel like it wasn't an accident. For some reason, God had closed my womb, and that was a hard truth to face. I was stuck between loving my God and hating the story that he was writing for me. And then there was her, Peninnah. She had lots of kids, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me of that. Oh, the worst were our trips to Shiloh. We would be sitting having what was supposed to be a celebratory family meal where we were celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, and all she would do was remind me of what I was not bringing to the table. It was like salt in the wound. I cried all the time. I stopped eating, Elkanah tried to comfort me. He tried to remind me that at least we had each other, and I wanted to let it go. I really did. I wanted to stop these feelings that I had, but I was just so sad, and I had this ache. It was like the core of who I was had been injured, and there was no room or space or air for it to heal. It just kept hurting no matter what I did. One festival, I was done. I left the meal and I went to the tabernacle, and I just felt so crushed by everything that was going on. And I didn't want to lash out at people, and so I tried to just pour everything that I had been feeling and everything I was thinking into this prayer. It was not pretty. It was not polished. It was raw. And it was ugly. But I prayed, God, would you just see me? Would you remember me? If you give me a son, I'll give him back to you. Because at that point, it was more about being seen by the God I loved than even getting what I wanted. And that vow, it wasn't a bargaining chip. It was surrender. I was learning to let go and to trust God. And even if he gave me what I wanted, I wasn't going to cling. So as you can imagine, I was kind of in my own world with all of that prayer. And then the priest Eli saw me, and he called me out on being drunk. Imagine that, me, the temple drunk, not my finest moment. And I explained to him very clearly that I hadn't had anything, and I was just brokenhearted. And he surprised me, because the priests were pretty swarmy back then. He turned to me and he blessed me. And he told me that he hoped that God would grant my request. And so as weird of a situation as that was, I left, and for the first time, I actually felt just a little bit lighter. I didn't know if God was going to give me what I had asked for, but I had surrendered my story. Whatever happened, I was willing to not raise a child. And I just asked that God would let me know that he remembered me. So the next morning, Elkanah and I worshiped and we went home. And God remembered me. I held a son in my arms and we called him Samuel. My empty arms were full. But Samuel was never mine. When he was weaned, I went up to Shiloh and I asked for Eli. I reminded him that I was the temple drunk, and he remembered me. And I got to tell him that God had actually answered my prayer. And I also told him that God had someone for him to take care of now. Letting go was very hard. But following God meant being faithful in the midst of my disappointment and in the midst of my blessing. Looking back, I see that my faith wouldn't have grown without the disappointment that I experienced. It was the soil where prayer and surrender could take root and really do something new in me. Samuel went on to anoint kings and to lead our nation. But before God could shape him, He had to shape me. So here's what I want you to hear. Following God means being faithful, especially when you don't like the story that he's writing. It means surrendering what you think you deserve or what you think you've earned because you've spent lots of years following him. And it means trusting the God who remembers. It means trusting that he's still at work, even if your story doesn't make sense right now. And now we will hear from Eli and his perspective on everything that happened.
I can't imagine a worse time to die. Our country was not ready for any kind of transition. I had tried to lead well, to lead to the best of my ability, but I'm no Moses. I'm no Joshua. Not even one of the judges. I had a lot of failings. Probably my two greatest failings were my sons, Hophni and Phinehas. I had hoped that they would take over the priesthood when I died. I had hoped that they would lead well, that they would do the things that I wasn't able to do as a leader. It would be one thing if they had just been incompetent, but they weren't. There was something twisted about my sons. They would take parts of the sacrifice that weren't theirs to take. They bought my silence by giving me portions of it to enjoy. And I know the people talked about what they did with the women who served. The stories were unfortunately true. I had hoped they would lead. My dreams for the future were shattered one day when a prophet, a man of God, came to see me, and he told me that the priesthood would be taken from my family and be given to somebody else. And so I lived for years after that with this dead future. There was nothing to look forward to. There was nothing to hope for. So I was sitting outside the tabernacle one evening when a woman came stumbling up the path. She was stumbling, she was moaning, she was weeping. I did not know what was wrong with her. I thought she maybe was possessed or sick. I thought maybe the nicest thing to say was to ask her if she was drunk. Because I knew a woman in that state was the kind of woman that my sons would try to take advantage of. I had to get her away. So I was so surprised when she said to me, "I'm not drunk. I'm praying." I thought, that's not how I look when I pray, but I know the kind of heartache that would make someone feel like praying like that. And so I did the only thing I knew to do as a priest. I blessed her. I said, "May God give you the desires, the requests that you've made of him." She prayed for a little bit longer, and then she shuffled on home, back to her family. I didn't think I would see her again. I didn't think if I did, I would remember her. The old memory's not what it used to be. 3 years later, I was surprised to see her coming back up the path, bringing not just herself this time, but a cow and some grain and some wine to sacrifice, and a 3-year-old boy. She explained to me that this was what she had prayed for. This was the boy she asked for. And now she was giving him to me. God in his grace was giving me another chance to raise a boy to follow him. And all of a sudden, I had a future again. I had hope again. That boy was unlike any child I've ever seen. He loved the Lord even before he knew who the Lord really was. He obeyed my instructions flawlessly. He even pointed out the discrepancies between the way we lived and my sons lived and the things that we told him to do. I knew that God was going to do great things for this boy, but I realized it was confirmed for me one night when he woke me up in the middle of the night. He said, "What did you need? I heard you calling for me." I said, "I didn't call for you." This happened 2 or 3 more times, and I realized that he was hearing the voice of the Lord, a voice I had not heard in a long time. So I said, "Next time you hear the voice, say, 'Speak, for your servant is listening.'" I rolled back over and went to sleep that night and didn't wake back up until the morning. Samuel came in, and I said, "What did God tell you last night?" And he wouldn't tell me. I said, it was one of the few times that I got frustrated with my son. I said, "You tell me." With this boy, I was frustrated with him. And he told me something that I had never told anyone else. He told me something that that prophet had said to me, that the priesthood was going to be taken from our family. He told me verbatim the same thing. And then he added, "And your sons are going to die on the same day." I knew then who my replacement was. It was Samuel. You see, what God had done was he had taken the dreams and the hopes that I had for the future. And even though they were dead, he raised up something new out of them. You see, Samuel was the kind of person who needed to be leading Israel because he was willing to do something for Israel that I wasn't willing to do, that my sons weren't willing to do. He was willing to sacrifice for them. And he didn't learn that from me. He learned that from his mother. The willingness to sacrifice. He would depend on God, and he would sacrifice for him. Not just sacrifice to him, which is what we had been doing. See, I did that occasionally. I would depend on God and I would sacrifice for him. But Samuel would do it again and again and again. He would do it constantly. And that's what Israel needed. And it gave me hope again. It gave me hope in the future again. I had something to live for. And more than that, I started to wonder if maybe this was God's plan for the future as well. To raise up another leader who would be willing to sacrifice for his people, to rescue them from more than just Philistines and bad worship. I had hope again. The story of Eli and Elkanah and Hannah presented to you is a little different, right? But what they've said is similar to what we hear a lot. How do you follow God? How do you follow Christ with your life? You depend on him. You sacrifice in response to what he's done for you. And you do it again and again and again and again and again. That's what the life of the disciple is. The difference between a Major League Baseball hitter and a AAA hitter is not the ability to hit a home run. It's the ability to do it consistently. A genuine follower of Jesus doesn't just depend on him once or sacrifice once. They do it again and again and again. And we hear a story like this and we think, oh, I'm supposed to be like Hannah or Elkanah or like Samuel even. And that would be nice to be like them. But more often than not, we wind up being more like Hophni and Phinehas. Maybe on a good day, we're Eli. This is why we need a Savior. Because, just like what was told to Hophni and Phinehas, because of their crimes, God was going to kill them on the same day. And he does, later on in the book of 1 Samuel. We deserve death too because of the failings that we have in following God. But God, in his grace, sends someone to sacrifice for us. This is Jesus Christ, who was crucified, buried, and resurrected so that we could follow after God. All you have to do is depend on him. All you have to do is trust in what he did. We have to stop trying to earn our place with God. And this is so hard for us because we live in a culture that praises independence, which is the opposite of dependence, and praises accumulation, which is the opposite of sacrifice. God calls you today to put your faith and dependence on him. And when he shows up and he calls you to do something, you say, "Speak, Lord," and you sacrifice. I don't know where you are in your journey of discipleship, but this is the call on your life today, is to depend and trust in him and ask him, "Lord, what do you want from me? I trust you, I depend on you. Now what do you want me to do?"